Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk about something that I think could become one of the biggest economic problems facing Russia as the war continues: drones. Now, go back only a few years and drones were largely regarded as recreational gadgets. You bought one, attached a camera to it and flew it over your house. Took beautiful aerial shots of landscapes, beaches, mountains, maybe your holiday resort. They were quite fun things and quite interesting, and they gave ordinary people access to aerial photography that previously would have required a helicopter. But the war in Ukraine has completely transformed what a drone now means, because drones are no longer simply flying cameras, they are weapons, and increasingly sophisticated weapons. They can travel hundreds or even thousands of kilometers and miles. They can carry substantial explosive payloads. They don't require a pilot sitting inside them, and many of them don't come back at all. And perhaps more importantly, they can potentially cause many times more economic damage than the cost to build and launch. And that is the really interesting part of this story, because Ukraine doesn't have to defeat Russia economically by destroying everything. It simply has to keep making Russia pay. Damage a refinery or a warehouse, close a port, hit an industrial facility, force Russia to spend money repairing it and then protecting it. Force Russia to spend even more money at doing it again and again and again. Ukraine's defense ministry has actually started putting a number on this. Based on its analysis of drone strikes during June, Ukraine says that for every $1 it spent striking Russian targets, it caused $5 of assessed losses. So the economics are simple: spend one and make Russia lose five. And if you can repeat that hundreds of thousands of times, suddenly relatively cheap drones become a potentially serious economic weapon. And that's what we're going to have a look at in today's video, because the scale of Ukraine's drone program is actually mind-bending. The UK recently announced that it was going to provide £1 million of finance to support 150,000 drones. An international coalition of European countries have also set a target of 1 million drones. But Ukraine itself has said that in 2026 it is aiming to manufacture 7 million drones. And that drone campaign is increasingly reaching beyond the battlefield and directly into the Russian economy. Oil refineries are being hit, as are ports, industrial facilities, warehouses. I recently reported about Wildberries. We'll talk about another big Russian retailer that's now under attack. Ukraine's objective is increasingly clear: make the cost of continuing this war more and more painful for Russia. Now, before we get into all of these details, if you're enjoying my updates, could you give this video a thumbs up? Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And if you've got the option of hitting that hype button, I think you get a limited number each month or each week, then please hit it. It's the funny looking symbol that sits alongside from the thumbs up. Now, one of the first things I wanted to show you today is this image, because it puts into perspective just how far drone technology has moved on. This is called Nyan, and it's a drone. It's been developed in the UK by Callan Lens, which is now part of BAE Systems. And it doesn't really look like the sort of thing people might imagine when you say the word drone. It looks like a mini military aircraft. The wingspan is around 3 meters, or about 10 feet. Its maximum takeoff weight is around 75 kilos. It's jet powered and can cruise at around 220 kilometers, roughly 150 miles per hour. Its published range is around 250 kilometers, which is close to 200 miles, depending on the mission. And it can carry a payload of around 20 kilos. So we're now talking about an unmanned aircraft capable of traveling substantial distances and delivering a significant payload on its target. And because nobody's sitting inside it, you don't have the same economics as a conventional military aircraft. There's no pilot to lose, no cockpit, no life support systems, no requirement for the aircraft to survive the mission. It's a one-way strike roll. Its entire purpose is to simply reach its target. And the Nyan is also designed specifically for the type of battlefield we're seeing in Ukraine. It has a low radar profile, it's highly maneuverable, and it's designed to continue operating in environments where satellite navigation is being disrupted or jammed. And that's important because modern warfare now involves an enormous amount of electronic interference. You aren't simply trying to shoot down the aircraft, you're trying to jam it, confuse it, stop it navigating, stop it communicating. So the technology is constantly evolving to overcome those defenses that Russia are putting up. More than 1,000 islands have already been produced, and this gives you an idea of where all of this warfare is heading, because these aren't the little recreational drones we were looking at a few years ago. These are increasingly becoming a low-cost unmanned aircraft designed specifically to attack valuable targets, and that fundamentally changes the economics. Imagine you want to attack a Russian industrial facility hundreds of miles away. Traditionally, you might require an extremely expensive missile or an aircraft worth tens of millions of dollars. You might risk a highly trained pilot, and if your aircraft gets destroyed, that's an enormous loss. But if you can perform that same mission with an unmanned aircraft costing dramatically less, then suddenly targets that might previously have been uneconomic to attack become more realistic. And this is exactly why Ukraine has invested so heavily in drones, because Ukraine faces a very obvious problem. Russia is enormous. Its population is much larger than Ukraine. Its conventional military resources are also huge. Its territory is vast. Ukraine cannot simply match Russia weapon for weapon indefinitely. So Ukraine needs asymmetric weapons. It needs ways of spending relatively small amounts of money while creating disproportionately large costs for Russia. And drones fit that strategy perfectly. Now, the Nyan sits towards the more sophisticated end of the spectrum. The millions of drones Ukraine is producing aren't as sophisticated as this. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got smaller FPV drones, reconnaissance drones, interceptor drones, logistics drones, battlefield air attack drones, and then the long-range strike aircraft increasingly travelling deep into Russian territory. But collectively, the numbers are staggering. Britain recently committed to providing finance for 150,000 Ukrainian per drone to produce drones before the end of 2026. 150,000. That's not over the next decade, that's over the next few months. That's the programme that the government has committed to. Germany has separately been reported to finance another 50,000 Ukrainian attack drones. And Britain and Latvia previously led an international drone coalition with the objective of supplying 1 million drones this year. But even that 1 million figure now looks relatively small compared with what Ukraine has actually built, because Ukraine says that in 2022 its domestic defence industry was producing several thousand drones. By 2025 that had risen to 4 million in that year, and its official target for 2026 is now more than 7 million in 1 year. That's not the target for the next 5 years, that is right now. And if we break that down, that's roughly 500,000 drones every month. So Ukraine has gone from producing thousands of military drones to producing millions in the space of only a few years. It's effectively built one of the biggest military drone industries in the world whilst simultaneously fighting a war. And 95% of the drones now being procured through Ukraine's Defence Procurement Agency are Ukrainian made. This isn't simply Western weapons being sent into Ukraine any longer. Ukraine itself has become a major weapons manufacturer. And what's even more striking is the speed at which those weapons are being used. During June, Ukraine's Delta battlefield system recorded more than 200,000 confirmed drone strikes. 200,000 in 1 month. That's more than 6,600 strikes every single day, and around 275 every hour, more than 4 every minute. And those are confirmed strikes, not simply drones being launched. So the overall level of drone activity is much higher than that, because Russia is managing to take some of these drones out. And this is where that economic calculation I mentioned earlier becomes really important, because Ukraine is analysing what these attacks cost and comparing that with the estimated value of the Russian equipment or infrastructure being damaged. Ukraine's defence industry said that during June it spent around $1,500 on average to hit an infrastructure target, around $2,700 to hit a piece of equipment, and around $3,000 per Russian personnel casualty attributed to those missions. And from its assessment of the value of the damage caused, Ukraine calculates that every dollar it spends on these strikes is producing more than $5 of Russian losses. So the question that Ukraine is now repeatedly asking is, how cheaply can we make Russia suffer? and nowhere has that been clearer than in Russia's oil industry. For a long period, Ukrainian long-range drone attacks were concentrated heavily on refineries, fuel depots, oil storage, ports and energy infrastructure. And the reason was obvious. Russia's energy industry is one of the foundations of its economy. Oil revenues bring money into Russia, fuel keeps its military moving, refineries contain sophisticated and expensive equipment, and some of that equipment isn't easy to replace for Russia anymore. So Ukraine doesn't necessarily have to destroy an entire refinery. If a relatively inexpensive drone damages one crucial piece of processing equipment and forces part of the refinery offline, the financial loss can potentially dwarf the cost of the drone by much more than 5 times. Then Russia has to repair it, and in the future it then has to protect that facility, deploy additional air defense around it, and worry about the next refinery. And Russia has a huge amount of infrastructure to defend. That's the problem. Russia is the largest country on Earth. There are refineries, ports, industrial sites, airfields, railways, warehouses, logistics centres, energy facilities, the list goes on. Thousands and thousands of potential targets spread across an enormous geographical area. Ukraine doesn't have to attack all of them. The possibility that they can be attacked creates a cost of its own. Russia has to decide what it protects, where it places its air defences and puts its electronic warfare systems, which facilities are most important, and every piece of equipment protecting a warehouse or a refinery is equipment that isn't somewhere else. But recently this strategy appears to have widened substantially because Ukraine hasn't simply been attacking the traditional targets. We've now seen repeated attacks on Wildberries, which is basically the equivalent of Amazon in Russia. It's Russia's largest online retailer. I made a separate video on that recently. It's an enormous company and an important part of Russia's consumer economy. Its logistics network connects suppliers, warehouses, deliveries, and millions of customers. And Ukrainian drones have now repeatedly hit Wildberry facilities. Reuters recently reported that at least 24 of the company's warehouses have been hit since the start of July. President Putin has even ordered a Russian government to help rebuild commercial warehouse infrastructure damaged in the attacks. That in itself is telling. Ukraine launches the drones, private Russian infrastructure is damaged, and eventually the Russian state has to pick up part of the bill. That's another way the economic costs spread out. And Wildberries is no longer the only retailer affected. Ozon has now been hit as well. Ozon is Russia's second largest online retailer. Its logistics infrastructure has been struck, disrupting operations and forcing evacuations. So we're no longer simply talking about attacks on Russia's oil industry. The potential economic battlefield is expanding from oil to gas to ports to shipping to factories to warehouses to distribution to retail logistics. The list is endless. Ukraine appears to be trying to push the cost of the war progressively deeper into Russia's domestic economy, and Moscow is clearly paying attention. President Putin has now accused Ukraine of opening what he calls Pandora's box by attacking economic targets inside Russia, and he says Russia will retaliate against Ukraine's most sensitive economic sectors. One obvious target is agriculture. Ukraine remains one of the world's major agricultural exporters. Its Black Sea ports are vital for getting grain and other commodities into global markets. Russia has already attacked Ukrainian port and export infrastructure, and those attacks have hurt Ukraine's ability to generate export income. So we're now moving towards something increasingly explicit: economic warfare. Ukraine attacks Russian refineries and logistics. Russia attacks Ukrainian ports and export infrastructure. Ukraine attempts to increase the cost of the war for Russia. Russia attempts to reduce Ukraine's ability to earn money. And drones allow both sides to carry out attacks at a scale which simply wasn't possible anything like this previously. Russia itself is also producing huge numbers of drones. During May, Russia reportedly launched more than 8,000 Shahed-type drones and decoys against Ukraine. So this is absolutely not a one-sided technology. Both countries are racing to manufacture enormous quantities of unmanned weapons. But from Ukraine's perspective, the attraction is obvious. It doesn't have to overpower Russia conventionally to create serious problems for the Russian economy. It needs to keep imposing costs, That's the asymmetric part of the strategy. Spend thousands, cause hundreds of thousands or millions in damage because they're forcing repairs and additional spending on air defense, creating disruption, raising insurance costs, interrupting production, reducing capacity, and then you continue attacking elsewhere. That's what makes the 7 million drone number so extraordinary. More than 7 million drones targeted for production this year. And even if most of those drones are relatively small battlefield systems, the industrial machine behind them is also supporting increasingly capable long-range weapons. Aircraft like the Nyan give us a glimpse of where that technology is going. Faster, longer, harder to detect, harder to jam, increasingly autonomous, capable of carrying larger payloads, and vastly cheaper than the traditional aircraft and missiles that once dominated long-range warfare. And that potentially presents Russia with a very uncomfortable economic problem, because defending an enormous country against cheap unmanned weapons is very expensive. There is an imbalance between what it can cost Ukraine to launch and the threat and what it can cost Russia to stop it. And even when Russia does stop the drone, it may still have to spend money doing so. That's why simply counting how many drones reach their target doesn't actually tell the whole story. Every attack forces a response. Every refinery has to think about protection now. Every strategically important warehouse has become vulnerable. Every port has to consider what happens if drones come tonight. And that's the point of Ukraine's economic strategy. It doesn't need one spectacular attack that destroys the Russian economy overnight. It needs thousands and thousands of small cuts, constant disruption, constant repair bills, constant pressure, and potentially an ever-growing cost of protecting an economy spread over 11 time zones. That's why something that started life as a recreational flying camera has evolved into something with the potential to inflict genuine economic pain on one of the world's largest countries. Ukraine says that $1 spent can generate at least $5 of Russian losses. It plans to manufacture more than 7 million drones this year. The UK is financing another 150,000, and the targets increasingly aren't simply soldiers and tanks. They're refineries, ports, factories, warehouses, distribution networks, Wildberries, Ozon. The Russian economy itself is becoming part of the battlefield, and Vladimir Putin's warning about Pandora's box tells us that Moscow understands exactly where this is leading, because if both sides increasingly decide that the opponent's economy is a legitimate battlefield, this drone war could become much broader and much more expensive. The war in Ukraine has already transformed the way the world thinks about drones. The next question is whether drones can now transform the economic balance of the war as well. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative, and most importantly, thought-provoking, trying to get you thinking in different ways. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thank you for everyone supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, thank you for that generosity. Really means a lot to me. Really appreciate it. And if you've signed up as a patron or a member, then thank you. That really does keep me motivated and thinking about making as many videos as possible. So really appreciate your support. As I've said in previous videos, I can't put a smile on your face right now, or maybe I can just by saying hi, but I can't put a smile on your face right now. But if you check out some of the jokes that I've been posting as separate videos, hopefully that will put a smile on your face.